Let's talk to the Executive Director at the Henry Jackson Society, Dr. Alan Mendoza. Good evening, Alan.
Hello, Kevin.
Would you agree with my synopsis there that it started, well, it didn't quite start at the G7 summit, but it started at the beginning of the month where Michael Gove was mysteriously exempted self-isolation, even though he came into contact with someone with coronavirus. We're told he's taking part in a pilot scheme. That means he doesn't have to self-isolate. Go figure. Then the G7 leaders merrily ignore all of the rules down in Cornwall. Then we learn that 2,500 UEFA officials will be exempted the rules when they come for the Euros final at Wembley. And finally, you know, you have not that I want either Scotland or England, the football teams, to be unable to play at the Euros, far from it. But it does seem a bit strange. They spent an entire match sharing bodily fluids, basically, with Billy Gilmore, the Scottish player, who subsequently tested positive for COVID just afterwards, and they're all allowed to carry on playing it. Now, if that was a park team, I guarantee you they wouldn't be. It's one rule for them and a different one for the rest of us. That is not the way to play this game, is it?
Kevin, it's utterly bizarre, actually, what's happening. I mean, the basis of law, of any good law in this country, is that it has to apply to everyone. There can be no question of having a law where some people can get round it or flout it or allow to flout it, whatever it works, and then for other people to look at this and go, oh, that seems fair, that seems reasonable, I understand why that's happening. None of the examples you make, you know, that you've given make any sense to most ordinary people out there. But it is very surprising, given how strongly the government's been playing this whole argument, why they are prepared to allow different rules in these cases. And you can look at each one and go, well, it's obviously understandable why they've decided to let the England and the Scotland teams play on. But the Croats are very unhappy with this, given they're the next opponents, thinking, well, hang on, are we going to get a coronavirus outbreak as a result of that? And then, of course, you've got the argument, well, if UEFA don't come with their 2,500 panjandrums, then Hungary will get the final. Yeah, but we understand that's obviously a commercial imperative. But what about all the thousands of pubs and restaurants out there that have to abide by the rules and are also facing financial ruin in that kind of way? It seems to me very odd that we're going down this path when the government's been so resolute about keeping to the rules, now that it seems to all be fraying at the edges, and not even at the edges, right in front of our eyes.
Indeed. Let's have a little listen to Boris emphasising how important the rules are.
There are unquestionably difficult months to come, and the fight against COVID is by no means over. And I have no doubt, however, that there are great days ahead. But now is the time for us all to summon the discipline and the resolve and the spirit of togetherness that will carry us through.
It's shameless, isn't it? It's not the time for all of us, apparently, to find this resolve. It's just for those of us, the peasants, who aren't VIPs, aren't UEFA officials, aren't G7 leaders, aren't international footballers. The rest of us have to obey the rules, but none of those people have to. How can Boris have been so sloppy to allow these optics to have unfolded?
I think, if you were going to put that message out there, then you had to be certain you were going to follow it. I think that's the first thing to note. If you want to keep to the rules in that way, make sure everyone keeps the rules. It doesn't make sense to have a duality of approach going on there. You ask how we've ended up in this. Look, we've been bounced into it once again by scientists and medical advisors who've been given excess power to determine what goes on. Politicians in this country really ought to be taking, Churchill's advice here, saying, look, these people advise, but we decide on this basis. We know that caseloads are going up. We can understand that, and the general public gets it. What we also know, though, is that the vaccination program, the whole point of being double vaccinated and getting through this, is to enable us to lead lives, ordinary lives, as we go on. So what I would have expected to see, let's go for 1 second and assume, yes, we're worried about the caseload. Surely we should have said, the people who are double vaccinated, they can continue life as normal and move in that way. But by pushing a blanket approach to this and then breaking it with these exceptions, it seems to me a very unusual way to go. And I'm not really sure the rationale as to why the government's thought this way. Perhaps, though, the positive side, perhaps it is a sign that we are going to get a break in 2 weeks' time, and the government's going to turn around and say, actually, we've decided we're going to let you out 2 weeks early now, or 2 weeks late, but 2 weeks early, if that makes any sense.
I hear that privately, at least, government ministers, cabinet ministers are conceding that the Chesham-Amersham disaster last week for the Tories, absolutely pummeled by the Lib Dems from nowhere in a seat that the Tories had never lost. I think, and the Tories went out of their way to say, oh, it's all local, HS2. They don't like HS2 there. It's the planning. Yes, of course, they were factors, big factors in that constituency. But I'll tell you the other factor, Alan, and that it's this. It was a vote, in my view, against the cancelling of Freedom Day, which should have been today, June the 21st. Boris had better watch his step. I believe, never mind these polls where leading questions lead him to believe that he has the majority on his side. I think he got a very big wake-up call in Chesham and Amersham last week. That was a vote for freedom, I thought.
It's interesting, Kevin, you speak about leading questions in polls and then relate it to actual elections. What I think is fascinating is if you ask people a generic question, do you feel safe for X, Y, and Z in that way, they tend to respond in the abstract and go, well, obviously, collectively, we do that. When you start making it personal, when you start saying to people, well, what about you? Do you think that you who've been, say, double vaccinated, or you who've had one vaccine, or you who have been going out and doing things in a perfect normal way, not catching COVID, do you think you personally should be kept under these rules? The answer invariably is no, actually, I don't. I've got a reason why I can't do that. And I suspect that what happened partly in Chesham-Amersham was, yes, there were definitely the HS2s and the local planning, but people had the opportunity to express their own opinion and went, actually, we don't much like this. We don't like the idea of the rules, and we've decided to go out there as well and cast our vote. Now we've got a choice personally rather than answering a generic question. And I think that's the danger of polls. You ask generic questions, you get generic answers without thinking of the personal answers that come if you ask people on individual level what has to go there.
Yeah, I mean, the questions, I'm sure they weren't quite as blatant as this, but put the case that the question was, in order to save millions of lives, would you support a delay to Freedom Day? And of course, people always answer yes. So, I know this. I've commissioned polls myself for newspapers, and the first thing the pollsters say is, what result are you looking for? And then they form the question accordingly. So if Boris has convinced himself through the prism of these polls that he's got the majority of the country behind him in this constant delay and constant keeping of these restrictions, I think he's got another thing coming.
Yeah, I think, again, you've got to look carefully at where the direction of travel is and where people are receiving conflicting messages. Again, early in the pandemic, we were all aware that the NHS faced problems should it be overcome by caseloads, which would lead inexorably to serious illnesses and then deaths. I mean, I think everyone got that broadly. But as time went by, people were being told, look, the way out is vaccination. I think it's a very dangerous situation when, with vaccination in full swing and with our vaccination program being ahead of many other countries, people can see that their freedoms, are being put second to the people in other countries whose vaccination programs are behind ours. Hungary is a great example, by the way. You look at this whole debate about where to hold the final. I don't know if you saw the pictures of the stadium, Kevin. You saw 60,000 people, cheek by jowl, like it was February 2020, like it was normal times in terms of how this worked. Now, Hungary's vaccination rate is good. It's a good rate, but it's not as good as ours. Yet there they are, sitting together in that way, and Hungary's opened up in a way that we haven't. Okay, yeah, we've got the Delta variant, we understand that, it's a problem. But what we also know is that the vaccinations prevent that variant from striking. So it seems very unusual that we're being kept in this perpetual sort of twilight zone, almost getting out, but never quite getting out of lockdown. And if I were the government, I'd think about this very carefully and go, actually, I don't want to wait 4 weeks now. Let's look. The 2 week thing looks pretty confident that the data is going our way. We can see that the link between caseloads and serious illness and death has been broken. Let's let everyone out. It's got to happen.
Yeah, and look to America. They prove that this ends when you decide it ends, when the nation and the the people of that nation decide enough. And that's what they've done in the States, and they are pretty much back to normal. In fact, they are back to normal, and we need to do the same, I think, as a matter of some urgency. Alan, thank you so much for your time. Alan Mendoza, Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director at the Henry Jackson Society.